Christianity, institutional hypocrisy, and satirical blasphemy. South Park's treatment of Christianity is both frequent and unflinchingly irreverent. While the show often features Jesus Christ as a literal resident of the town, it rarely uses him to reflect on biblical theology. Instead, Jesus is portrayed as flawed and media-obsessed. For example, his talk show, Jesus and Pals, becomes a vehicle for commentary on modern fame, with Jesus compromising his values for ratings and occasionally even resorting to violence, such as using guns to kill. One particularly controversial example involves a statue of the Virgin Mary bleeding from what appears to be her anus. Townspeople see it as a miracle and flock to be healed, only to revoke their faith when it's revealed the bleeding is actually menstrual. This scene mocks the irrationality and sexism in how supposed miracles are accepted or dismissed. South Park also targets Christian rock music in an episode where Cartman creates a band that sings overtly sexual lyrics about Jesus, such as, "I want to feel his salvation all over my face." This satire critiques not only the commercialization of faith, but also the blind consumption by Christian audiences. Critiques intensify when aimed at institutions. In Red Hot Catholic Love, the Vatican is lampooned as corrupt, with priests openly admitting to pedophilia and church leaders defending them. The Pope is depicted as senile, and Vatican officials are shown boiling dissenters alive. These portrayals emphasize the show's stance that religious institutions often prioritize power and self-preservation over morality or reform. South Park's most severe commentary may be directed at Christian conversion camps, depicted as abusive and psychologically harmful. In one episode, a counselor compares gay children to paper clips that God must bend straight. The implication is clear. The show condemns the harm inflicted under the guise of religious correction. Catholicism, power, corruption, and the Vatican under fire. South Park's most scathing religious critiques are directed at the Catholic Church, particularly its leadership and systemic abuses. Unlike its portrayal of Protestantism or Mormonism, the Catholic Church is depicted as an institution corrupted by power, archaic doctrine, and moral failure. In several episodes, the Church is mocked for prioritizing image and control over genuine spirituality. In Red Hot Catholic Love, Father Maxey is ridiculed during sermons, and parishioners grow disillusioned with the faith. This dissatisfaction stems not from theology, but from the Church's inability to address real concerns, like the widespread sexual abuse of children by clergy. South Park exaggerates these scandals while directly referencing real-world events. Priests are shown openly admitting to pedophilia, treating it as normal behavior, and the Vatican is portrayed as a body that protects them rather than condemns them. Leaders cover up abuse, defend perpetrators, and threaten dissenters. At one point, they imprison Jesus for defying the Church, and the Pope is shown as incontinent and senile, a symbol of leadership in decay. Another criticism is the Church's resistance to modernization. South Park invents absurd elements like worshipping a spider queen or honoring alien species like the Galgamax with razor-sharp vaginas, symbolic stand-ins for incomprehensible or outdated dogma. The point is not literal parody, but to show how doctrine can drift into irrelevance or absurdity when it refuses to evolve. Ultimately, South Park argues that the Catholic Church's greatest sin is not theological, it is structural. The institution's commitment to power, secrecy, and tradition supersedes any allegiance to God, morality, or the well-being of its followers. The Vatican, in South Park's view, is the clearest example of what happens when faith becomes a machine for control. Atheism, South Park's rational yet ruthless takedown. Although South Park often critiques organized religion, its portrayal of atheism is far from flattering. In fact, the show dedicates multiple episodes to mocking the self-righteousness, elitism, and tribalism found within atheist circles. In the two-part storyline featuring a dystopian future, atheist factions, the Unified Atheist League, the United Atheist Alliance, and the Allied Atheist Alliance, engage in violent war over which group has the superior name. Despite all sharing identical beliefs, they refuse to coexist peacefully, and anyone who tries to introduce open-mindedness is executed. This arc parodies religious schisms, emphasizing that atheism, when treated dogmatically, becomes just another ideology ripe for conflict. Another example is the foster home in The Poor Kid, where Kenny is sent to live with strict agnostics. This setting parodies religious households by mirroring them exactly, only with dogmatic uncertainty replacing dogmatic faith. Children are reprimanded not for believing in God, but for expressing any certainty at all. South Park uses this to highlight the absurdity of rigid ideological enforcement regardless of belief content. The creators also take aim at atheism's perceived arrogance. Richard Dawkins, shown as a pompous messianic figure, and Ms. Garrison, who changes her worldview erratically, are ridiculed for being overconfident in their intellectual superiority. In Red Hot Catholic Love, townspeople abandon Catholicism and declare themselves atheists, only to immediately demand their views be catered to. A critique of ideological entitlement that mirrors the behavior of the religious zealots they just rejected. Throughout these episodes, South Park does not attack scientific reasoning or skepticism itself. Instead, it draws attention to the human tendency to turn even rational philosophies into rigid systems plagued by the same tribalism and intolerance as the religions they reject. Mormonism. Flawless followers, absurd origins. Mormonism receives one of the most unique treatments in all of South Park. Unlike other religions, which are often mocked through their followers or institutions, Mormonism is primarily critiqued for the content of its religious texts, specifically the origin story of Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. In the episode All About Mormons, a Mormon family moves to South Park and immediately stands out for their excessive wholesomeness. They are portrayed as impossibly polite, successful, loving, and supportive. Their presence causes curiosity rather than mockery, and Stan's family eventually converts, captivated by their positivity. However, as Stan learns more about Mormon beliefs, the show begins to ridicule the narrative itself. South Park highlights the implausibility of Smith's revelations, his conveniently disappearing golden tablets, and the blind acceptance of those around him. These scenes are punctuated with the repeated refrain, "dumb, dumb, 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 dumb," to emphasize how absurd the story appears under scrutiny. At the climax, Gary, the Mormon boy, delivers a speech to Stan explaining that while the story may sound unbelievable, what matters is the life it inspires. One focused on kindness, family, and doing good. His final words, "suck my balls," are his only profane moment, strategically used for impact. In this narrative, South Park separates myth from meaning. It criticizes the veracity of Mormon teachings, but affirms the value of the ethical lifestyle they promote. The critique is not about deception or harm, but about the tension between literal belief and beneficial behavior. This nuanced treatment positions Mormons as the correct religion within the show's universe, not because their doctrine is true, but because it creates happy, functional people. It's the clearest expression of South Park's overarching view on religion. Stories can be ridiculous, but if they lead to goodness, they still hold value. Judaism and anti-Semitism. Between identity and insult. South Park's handling of Judaism walks a tightrope between affectionate ribbing and pointed social critique. Unlike the direct satire of religious dogma seen in other faiths, the focus here is on Jewish identity, culture, and how it intersects with broader American life, especially through the eyes of Kyle Broflovsky, the show's primary Jewish character. Early episodes emphasize Kyle's isolation in a predominantly Christian world. In Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh, Kyle laments his exclusion during the holiday season and sings about being a lonely Jew on Christmas. These moments capture the experience of cultural displacement and the tension between assimilation and identity. The show also leans hard into Jewish stereotypes, both visually and behaviorally. Characters like Sheila Broflovsky and Cousin Kyle embody exaggerated tropes of the overbearing, anxious Jewish parent or the overly nasal, neurotic youth. Episodes like Jubilee create entire fictional Jewish rituals, with children crafting macaroni pictures for a holographic Moses who demands arts and crafts instead of reverence. While hyperbolic, these portrayals are not framed with malice but with cultural familiarity, a caricature, not an attack. In the episode Cupid Yay, Kyle is targeted by a school-wide rumor that he secretly controls Hollywood, a direct reference to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories popularized by public figures like Kanye West. The show visualizes the spread of this propaganda through a literal Cupid Kanye who shoots arrows of hate, infecting others with suspicion. It ends by fact-checking the myth. Hollywood is diverse and not controlled by any one ethnic group. The show uses Jewish characters as punchlines, but also shields them when lines are crossed. It draws a firm boundary between cultural humor and bigoted ideology. Scientology, myth, secrecy, and total ridicule. South Park's treatment of Scientology stands out as one of the most aggressively critical portrayals of any belief system in the show's history. Unlike the nuanced or culturally grounded satire used with most religions, Scientology is addressed with open contempt, framed as both fraudulent and dangerous. In the episode Trapped in the Closet, the show directly explains Scientology's origin story, involving the galactic overlord Xenu, frozen souls dropped into volcanoes, and devices to measure thetans, by placing on-screen text that states, This is what Scientologists actually believe. By stripping away euphemism and retelling the narrative plainly, the show aims to expose what it sees as the absurdity of the religion's mythology. The episode doesn't stop at the belief system. It openly mocks the church's obsession with celebrity endorsement, particularly through its portrayal of Tom Cruise, who is literally depicted as hiding in a closet for the entire episode. A double entendre meant to ridicule both secrecy and rumored personal matters. Other celebrities like John Travolta and R. Kelly are also drawn into the satire, creating a layered critique of how pop culture shields or normalizes controversial institutions. South Park also critiques the litigious nature of Scientology. In the episode, the church is shown threatening to sue Stan for claiming to be the reincarnation of founder L. Ron Hubbard, a reference to the real-life organization's notorious use of lawsuits to silence critics. The creators themselves, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, were reportedly warned against airing the episode due to potential legal action. This threat became part of the narrative, reinforcing the show's position that the church's power lies not in faith, but in intimidation. Crucially, South Park does not treat Scientology as a religion at all. In the source video's own words, Scientology isn't a real religion. It is cast instead as a manipulative, profit-driven cult with a thin spiritual veneer. There's no spiritual benefit offered, no moral value explored, and no sympathetic characters portrayed. The message is blunt. Scientology, according to South Park, is a fabricated belief system designed to exploit its followers. This is where the show's usual rulebook, separating the faith from its institutions or followers, is thrown out. With Scientology, everything is subject to ridicule: the mythology, the leadership, the followers, and the entire premise. It is the only religion the show refuses to validate even slightly, presenting it instead as a cautionary tale of unchecked belief in service of control. Islam: censorship, extremism, and the limits of satire. South Park's engagement with Islam is sparse but explosive, constrained by real-world censorship and cultural sensitivities. While Christianity, Atheism, and Judaism are dissected regularly, Islam is largely untouched except in relation to terrorism, censorship, or public controversy. In Super Best Friends, Muhammad appears as a peaceful character with superpowers, flying and conjuring fire. At the time, there was no backlash. But following the 2005 Danish cartoon controversy, the depiction of Muhammad became dangerous. When South Park revisited the character in later episodes, specifically in Cartoon Wars 1 and 2, Comedy Central censored the image and even bleeped out his name due to credible death threats. This marked a turning point in the show's tone on the subject. These episodes use the censorship itself as the point of satire, positioning the creators' struggle as commentary on the chilling effect of religious extremism. The actual religion of Islam is not critiqued. The focus is on Western media's response to fear, the inconsistency of censorship, and the question of who controls speech in a supposedly free society. In The Snook, Islam is indirectly explored through the lens of post-9/11 racism. A Muslim student named Bahir joins South Park Elementary and is immediately targeted by Cartman, who suspects him of terrorism based solely on his religion and ethnicity. Cartman's bigotry leads Bahir's family to leave town, illustrating how ignorance and racial profiling fracture communities. In the Ginger Cow episode, South Park briefly entertains interfaith unity, suggesting a prophecy shared between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam could bring peace. It's one of the few moments where Islam is included without violent undertones, but it remains a fleeting gesture. Overall, South Park avoids deep theological or institutional critiques of Islam. Its rare mentions tend to center on American fears, censorship, and Islamophobia, likely reflecting the creator's self-acknowledged unfamiliarity with the faith and the very real dangers associated with mocking it. Want to know the most legally dangerous South Park episode explained in detail? Then click here.